Okay, so as we've been talking about the design patterns we're using, this MVC pattern, one of the real strengths that it has is the ways in which we can basically get the data moved around where we need it to be at different points in time, right? Past the data, past the butter, past the margarine, whatever. No, we're focusing on past the data, right? So we're going to talk about the whole process quickly once again. We've gone over this before, but let me just review quickly that MVC works. We have a request comes into, and it's routed to a controller, right? And then what does a controller do? Well, it does whatever it has to do. It pulls information often from the database or from other resources that it has and puts together, kind of symbolizing it as a briefcase here, but it's sort of the presentation model. That's a term often used, right? A presentation model. And then the next thing is it takes that, incorporates it into the view and merges that model into the view itself. So it's kind of like as I said, a mail merged effect where we get the information in place in this view, the structure of an HTML page all ready to go. So we're able to return it back finally as a response to the UI in front of the user themselves, right? Well, that's simple enough, right? The idea of the flow, but a lot of other things can happen with data, how it has to get from A to B to C to D before it actually gets back into the response, right? Multiple ways of getting data even into the view itself. So we need to just kind of go back and review that to make sure we're all on the same page and understand what the options are, right? So obviously, what we've been doing mostly are working with strongly typed views. You look at the top of the view and you'll see that at model directive. Maybe just for a moment here, I'm going to, I got all kinds of junk open. Oh, I went past it. Okay, here's our solution file. So here in my patient controller, right? We come into the index action. I go get this data and I just return view, right? So if I come down to the views, come to index, there we see. There's our model right at the top, okay? So our model for this particular view is a collection of patient objects. Now, notice we don't have the advantage of throwing in a namespace here, so we have to fully qualify medicaloffice.models.patient, right? But that is how we're using a strongly typed view, in this case with a collection. Of course, if I want to bring up details, you see the same thing. It's a model directive, so we have a strongly typed view. In this case, the difference is we have a single patient object is the model of the view, right? Okay, so that's the one way. The model might be an instance of a class or a collection of objects, okay? But basically it has its own composition containing its own objects, collections, et cetera, and we can work with whatever the model is. But not all views will be strongly typed, right? Sometimes we have a view that does not have a model directive at all, and so we get data there in some of our other means, right? But even if it has a model directive, even if it is a strongly typed view, right, there often is additional information that we need to provide to the view itself, okay? Again, let me give you an example, right? If I come over here, well, maybe I'll choose the edit view instead, right? So we have our model, which is a single patient, but down here where we have our select element, right? Remember, we add a view bag, okay, to carry a object referred to by the key. The key is doctor ID, and that object itself was what? Well, let's go back to the patient controller. Let's come down to the edit, right? That's where we prepared our populate drop-down lists, right? So let me just go to definition here, right? So here is where we created our select list, right? And we put it into view data. So that's another mechanism we have for getting data to the view, right? Okay. Now, what is this? We say view data in our code in the controller, but if you noticed, it was called view bag in the actual view itself. What are these things? How do they relate to each other? Well, really, they're basically two names for the same things. They accomplish the same purpose. Pass information, not part of the model, outside of the model for the view, right? So we can work with it there. So view data is a key value dictionary, right? So that value can be a simple string. Keys are always a string, basically. The value could be a simple string. It could be a simple data type. Could be an object. Could be a collection of objects, right? Whatever. The point is, view data requires typecasting. It just knows it's an object. It has no information other than that. Can't help you with anything else, right? So for complex data types, view data works fine to a degree, but view bag is a wrapper, a dynamic wrapper around view data. And we have setters and getters, right? And we can, without converting to a strongly typed object, we can actually get information because the dynamic wrapper itself will have information about what kind of an object it is, right? Another big difference to be aware of, view data, this key value dictionary, you can never have a null, right? Whereas view bag can actually have null. So if you're going to store something in this mechanism here to transfer data, and there's a chance that what you're going to put in there comes back as null, then definitely you have to use view bag right from the beginning, right inside of your controller. So you might say, wow, if view bag is so much more powerful and better at even handling data conversions and so on, why ever bother with view data, right? Well, bottom line, view bag is slower, right, than view data because of the overhead involved in all that, right? So the bottom line is use view data unless typecasting is required, right? So there are times when we have to use view bag, but otherwise view data will do the job nicely for us, right? Okay, just an example here. Suppose we want to pass a object or a collection based on one of our models, but it is not the model of the view. Definitely, we would use the view bag in order to get it into the actual view itself, right? Okay. Well, so far so good. We actually have seen both of those. We've talked about and, highlighted the fact that we have strongly typed views. We have a model directive. We've seen view data, view bag used before. What is this guy? Well, here's a third or another type of mechanism we have for transferring data from view to view. Temp data is a dictionary, just like view data, but view data basically lives and dies in a single response cycle, right? Basically, you throw information into view data, even view bag, it gets sent back in the response, and that's it. It's gone. It's done. The the funeral band is finished playing already, right? It's gone. There's no way to access it again after that point in time. So temp data, the main difference here, temp data allows us to pass information from one action to another action right inside the controller, or even from one controller to another. So you might have put together a bunch of helpful information perhaps in an action of a controller, but you want to pass that off, not just return it to the view, but maybe you're going to have to, for some reason, redirect to a different action in the controller, right? Or maybe even to a different controller altogether. Well, if you throw it in temp data, you can in the code there of the controller, or even in the view that you're going to display from the response coming from that second controller. If it's in temp data, it will be available there as well, right? So basically, it has a much longer lifespan. Now, it's not infinite, right, by any stretch. Okay, as it says here, it's automatically removed once it's been accessed or recovered, right? Okay, so as soon as it's been pulled out, that's it. It's done and gone. Okay, so it's kind of single use, but it does prove itself very, very useful. There are times later on you'll see that when it's helpful for us, maybe we're inside one controller action and we're going to go back to the index, for example, but we want to give them a particular kind of feedback. Well, we can throw it in temp data, and then it'll still be available to maybe throw up on the screen from a different controller altogether, or even a different action within the same controller. All right, so the model directive, view data, view bag, temp data, those are a number of different ways that we have. Partial views, okay? I kind of threw this in because it's another way to often carry data to a view. Now, we have talked quickly about partial views, but we haven't spent much time and we haven't really done much to implement it yet ourselves. So if I go back to Visual Studio for a second, let me remind you down here, for example, right? if I go to our layout page, this is that structure that most of our views fit into. Remember, because we come down here in render body, where that's where the view is actually rendered. Oh, look at this. Partial name, right? Login partial. So that's where this separate partial view here, underscore login partial, right? This is that where we sign in the upper right corner of the screen. We either have a register and login link if we aren't logged in yet. If we are signed in, then we have a link where it says hello to the user and then a logout button, right? Well, this is a partial view, right? And it gets rendered inside this div or this tag inside the view that's hosting it, so to speak, right? So that's another way to pass data because, of course, a partial view, now in this case, this one has some data in it, but it's mostly just HTML. But we might, in some cases, have a partial view with its own model. Yeah, believe it or not, right? A partial view can be strongly typed with its own model, separate from the model of the view that it's being embedded into, so to speak, okay? And they'll also have, by the way, they also have access to the view data of the parent view, right? So we can embed partial views, into partial views, et cetera, right? So it just opens another dimension to the way in which we can get data moving around from one place to another inside the flow of information through our MVC application, right? Now, we haven't done much work yet with partial views, but it fits in this discussion, and I can assure you going forward, we're going to make extensive use of partial views as we build a more and more complex application together. Okay, so that kind of finishes our discussion of the actual data transfer mechanisms we have within MVC.